But I think we have to face something, don't we?
Yes.
That Marxism is weak in the world now, especially given its history. That the country that pioneered it, the Soviet Union in 1917 as a power, has gone. It imploded on itself. And that whatever is going on in China doesn't quite fit what was the idea of a communist or a socialist society. That means we who are part of the left, or at least me, have to face that whatever it was and however well it worked then, it is not working so successfully now. That has to be. If you don't face that, I don't know how you proceed. You have to face the problem before you find the solution. You know, it's like the AA program. You have to stand up there and say, hello, I'm an alcoholic, before you can begin to deal with your problem. So what is the left going to do? I think you have to begin by saying that what the gentleman over there said, socialize the means of production and have government planning, may well be necessary conditions of a transition, but they're not sufficient. What else might be missing? What might have been missing in the Soviet Union and China so that they should have ended up where they are now? Well, here's a thought to leave with you. And it's developed on the website if you're interested. Maybe the problem was that it was too macroeconomic focused. You know, the whole focus is on what's going to happen to the big economy, to the top. Who's going to own the means of production? Who's going to plan? It's the big situation. It's the central government. It's the whole society you're looking at. Maybe what was missing was the transformation at the base, in the enterprises and in the households where people live most of their lives. Maybe what the socialist movement needs, even maybe what it needed then, was the micro, the base level transformation to shape and constrain the macro level. Maybe you needed a radical change in how enterprises and households are organized so that the power at the bottom would shape, influence, and constrain the power at the top. How would it work in an enterprise? Real simple. And there's a lot of history of the human race that knows this. And maybe what socialism should have meant, whatever it meant at the level of government ownership, whatever it meant at the level of planning, should have also meant that the enterprise, the place where work is done, the office, the store, the factory, is itself also radically transformed. And when I say radically transformed, when I say radically transformed, I mean something very concrete. That we would have said that the enterprise from now on has to be run in a completely different way. No board of directors, neither the private board of directors voted in by the shareholders, nor the government officials sent in by the party or the state. That the enterprises have to be run by the people who work in them. Monday to Thursday, they come to work and they do their regular job. Friday, they come to work and they sit around and they make all the decisions democratically. What to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and above all, what to do with the profits that their work produces. This would have meant, to use Marxian language, that the surplus produced at the base of society would be controlled at the base of society. The state would have to bargain to get it and would have to be accountable if it was going to continue to survive by getting a cut of that surplus. And it would put the people, the workers, in the position of controlling the surplus they produced. That was not done in the Soviet Union, and it was not done in China. Let me just finish the story, because we don't have enough time. Let me give you just a hint of how the United States would have been different had we done such a thing. Remember, I mentioned to you the history. In the 1970s, wages stopped rising. Why did that happen? because we had employers here, all of whom had gone to business school and had learned as the first rule, if you don't have to pay higher wages, don't do it. That's a smart businessman or woman. For most of the history of the United States, we had a labor shortage. We had a successful capitalism that knew how to develop very rich resources. We lacked one thing, people. For two reasons. We killed the people who were here when we came. We killed them. And we had so much land after we got rid of the people that not only did we have to bring people from out of the country, Europeans as immigrants, but no sooner did we get them to come and work here than if we didn't treat them right, i.e. give them a higher wage, they would run away and get free land in the West. So business in this country had always to pay higher wages, to get workers and to keep them. In the 1970s, that changed. With the computer, we needed few people. With the export of jobs around the world, we needed fewer people. With the movement of women into the working force to be liberated from their drudgery at home, we had more supply of labor, just as we needed less of it. And we had immigrants. Suddenly, you put all those together, and the employers didn't have to raise wages anymore. And when they didn't have to, they didn't do it. Now fast forward. Suppose workers were in charge of their own enterprises. Guess what? They would have continued to raise their wages. Why the hell not? They would have raised their wages for the same reason that capitalists raised them the previous 150 years. Because capitalism was successful here, because surpluses were produced, because workers became more productive, they could pay higher wages. If the workers were in charge in the 1970s, they would have continued to pay higher wages. In which case, we wouldn't have had an exhausted working class. A little footnote I mention sometimes. The United States is the country in which the working class does more hours of paid labor per year than in any other country on the planet. We do 20% more hours of paid labor than they do in France, Germany, and Italy. We are exhausted. That would not have been necessary and would not have happened if workers had been in charge and paid higher wages. Even more important, there wouldn't have been a need for a borrowing binge. How do we know that? Because in the previous 150 years, there had never been such a borrowing binge because wages went up without it. And here's another thing workers in charge of their factories wouldn't have done. They wouldn't have moved them to China either, for the obvious reason. Our economic history would have been radically different. Last point. Imagine a left in America that went to the working class and said what socialist revolution means is not only socialize the means of production and planning, but a radical change in your daily life. You're not going to be a worker. You're going to be a worker and a boss. Because all job descriptions have both parts in them. We're going to democratize, a word Americans really like to hear. We're going to democratize work. We're going to democratize the enterprise. We're going to say that democracy doesn't stop at the front door of the place you work at. It's inside too. And that's going to change your life right away, every day from now on. It's not a revolution where you have a government change and you hope it makes a difference. It's right there where you exist. That might be a new way of defining socialism that taps into the history of co-ops in this country, that taps into the history of community production, of the concept of community. It might appeal to people on levels we as a left have not been used to talking to people about. And I meant it before when I said it's a change at the base, not only in the enterprise, but also in the household. That the relationships between men and women and parents and children in the household where a lot of work is done has to also be transformed as part of a socialist program that addresses all the needs of people, which are just as much about their intimate life at home as it is about their work life on the job. And a socialist movement that took that seriously, that added those components to the traditional planning and socialization, might be a new socialism adequate to the 21st century because it had learned the lessons of both its successes and its weaknesses in the last 2 centuries. And there is that old adage that if you do not learn from the history of the movement you are trying to build, you will destroy it, even though you don't mean to. I do think this is a crisis in which these options that I just sketched for you in 3 minutes have an audience they've never had before. I tell this story, which is why it comes out of my mouth as smoothly as it does. I tell this story everywhere. On the radio, on the television, in my public speaking, to audiences you wouldn't imagine. The last time I did this was in Alabama, and people were very interested in these ideas. Did they agree? No. But they did. But they took it seriously, we discussed it, and they asked the questions that you should ask when you're hearing something that is interesting, new, a little bit questionable, but something that maybe has something. That's more of an opening than we have had in a long time. So much so that I really do think this crisis has affected the United States in such a way that it becomes correct to say, if we on the left don't take advantage of this, shame on us.